So the gist of this lesson is you're given a triangle, and it's a right triangle, okay? So everything we're doing over the next week or two is going to involve right triangles. It's a right triangle, and you're trying to find a side on the triangle. You guys can look at the worksheet I gave you, and it looks like this, okay? Now I'm going to do a problem where you don't need a calculator, and then I'm going to do a few problems where you will need a calculator. So here's the first example. We want to try to find x. We want to try to find x. And the thing with the right triangle is, as long as you know an angle and a side, you can solve for the triangle. All right, so what do I mean by that in this particular triangle? Well, we already know this angle, and we know a side, right? If we know an angle and a side, we can solve for an unknown side. That's the gist of the lesson. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that. I'll give you a hint. You're going to be using trig functions. So we're starting at 30 degrees. How does x relate to 30? I'll give you three choices: adjacent, opposite, or hypotenuse. Opposite, right? Directly opposite 30. Okay, how does 15 relate to 30 degrees? Adjacent. Okay, so basically what you have to do is, once you figure out it involves opposite and adjacent, you have to remember which trig function is that. Yeah, tangent is opposite over adjacent. Okay, tangent is opposite over adjacent. That's why I had you guys learn those, because we're going to be using them over the next several weeks. We're going to be using practical problems involving trig functions. So the first thing you're going to do is just write that out. We know the opposite side is labeled x in this particular diagram, and adjacent is equal to 15. Again, you only have to write the steps out once. So you're writing out what you know. You know the angle's 30, opposite side is x, adjacent is 15. The next step is to figure out which trig function involves the sides that you know. Okay? Now you guys told me that opposite over adjacent is tangent. So you have to know those 6 trig functions. I'll go ahead and review those real quick for you guys. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. The next 3 are flipped from that. Cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite. Secant is hypotenuse over adjacent. Cotangent is adjacent over opposite. I will definitely go back, yes. Now I do need to say something about this, because there's actually always going to be 2 choices. What do I mean by that? Well, doesn't cotangent also involve opposite and adjacent? It's flipped, right? It's adjacent over opposite. Let me explain why you would not choose cotangent. Because if you chose cotangent, you'd have 15 over x instead of x over 15, and you do not want the variable in the denominator. You want it in the numerator, okay? Reason why we choose tangent is because it's opposite over adjacent, and it's going to be a lot easier when you use your calculator to solve this to have the variable on the top. So if you need help deciding which trig function to use, just let me know. But again, you want to choose the one where the variable is in the top, not the bottom. Okay, so we don't want to use cotangent. So again, there's always 2 choices because every trig function has a flipped version. The next thing you're going to do is just write out the definition of the trig function you chose. So in this case, we chose tangent. We're going to write O over A. Had we chosen sine, we would write O over H or whatever. Okay. So you write out the trig definition. You can plug in what you know. Okay. And so we're going to plug in the angle, which in this case is 30. We're going to plug in the opposite side, which in this case is x, which we're trying to solve, and the adjacent side, which was 15, I think. It's going to look just like that. Again, the angle's 30, the adjacent side is x, and the opposite side is, the opposite side is x, adjacent side is 15. And then once we do that, we can actually solve for x. Now, like I said, for this first example, You can do it without a calculator, and then I'll show you how to do it with a calculator, which actually on your assignment, it's all calculator involved. Does anybody know how to get x by itself from here? You got a 15 on the bottom, so how do you get it to the other side? Multiply it, right. You do the opposite operation. So if it's being divided, you want to multiply. If it was being added, like if it was x plus 15, you would subtract 15. So we're going to multiply both sides by 15, and now we have x by itself. So basically, the reason we did that on the right was so we could cancel the 15s, and now we have something like this. Okay, so again, I'm going to show you how to do this without a calculator, which goes back to why I had you guys memorize these values, and then I'll show you how to do it with a calculator. So without a calculator, you need to know what tangent of 30 degrees is. I know it's hard to remember all that stuff. Does anybody remember that one? I'll give you a hint. It involves square root of 3. Good job. Square root of 3 over 3. So that means we're going to replace this with square root of 3 over 3. Now again, on your worksheet, when you get to this point, you'll just be plugging this into the calculator, and I'll show you how to do that, okay? You definitely want to make sure your calculator is in degree mode, which is why I had you guys download that app, because I can show you how to do it on that app. If you're using a different calculator, I can show you how to do that. So tangent of 30 is square root of 3 over 3. And then at this point, since we have a 15 on the top and a 3 on the bottom, it cancels to 5 radical 3. So this is going to be our answer without a calculator. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to plug this into the calculator. So we have 15 tangent of 30 degrees. So again, you're just going to straight type it in just like this. With this particular app, Desmos, you do not need to even use parentheses. That's why I like it, because it's so straightforward. And what I also like about it is you can keep that and just keep moving down and typing in more stuff, okay? Right. And so what I'm going to do now is we're going to do one of the examples. All right, so I'm going to try to draw this problem out. We'll just call this example 2, which is... All right, so I'm just going to draw this. It's not going to be perfect. This is x, and this is 48, and this is 12. Okay, thank you, sir. You're right. It's got to be a right triangle, otherwise we can't. All right, so first of all, we got to figure out, we're starting at this angle, 48. This would be the opposite side, right? So if you want to, you can just write like opposite equals x, right? Now, what would this side be? No. Good guess. Yes, remember, it's opposite. It's opposite the right angle, so it's hypotenuse. The adjacent side would be up here, okay? It'd be the side that's next to 48. That's not the hypotenuse. So I'll just write equals h. Now, what trig function involves opposite and hypotenuse? Sine. So now what I'm going to do is write sine equals over h. And since it involves 48 degrees, I can go ahead and write sine of 45 degrees equals, and then if we look at what we have labeled up here, opposite is x, hypotenuse is 12, so I'm just going to write equals x over 12. Okay, and then the only other thing you have to do, it's 48. I just realized that it's 48, not 45. I wrote the wrong thing. Yeah, sorry about that. So last thing you got to do, just like we did on the previous example, multiply both sides by 12. And this right here, is going to give you the answer. So what you do is you just go back to the app and you type in 12 sine 48, and we get 8.91, and it's going to round to 8 because it's 7/7. So 8.918 is going to be the answer. And so what we've done is we've solved for this side of the triangle. That means it's 8.918 feet, whatever, right? I mean, let's say this is actual in feet. This would be 12 feet, and this would be a little bit less than 9 feet. Okay? Now I want to do one more example. Yeah. So let me see if I can draw this. This is 19, and this is 52 degrees. Thank you. Thanks for reminding me. What would I do without you? Okay, so we're starting at this angle. How does 19 relate to 52? All right, good. So I'll just write A equals 19. And how about X? Hypotenuse. Okay, so X equals H. Now, here's why I'm doing this example, because if we were to choose cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Seems like it would work, right? But you have X on the bottom. So you need to choose the other trig function so that the variable is not, the variable's on the top. So what's the opposite of cosine? Secant. Yeah. Secant is the flipped version of sine. And so we're going to use secant, and you'll see why in a minute. Secant is, instead of A over H, it's H over A. Okay, that way, when I plug in X, it's on the top. Okay, and it'll work out just like before we were doing the other examples. So we got secant of the angle, which in this case is 52, equals X over 19. And you can already kind of see, like, this number, when you plug into your calculator, it's always going to end up next to that number, because we have to multiply both sides by that in order for it to cancel. So going back to the app, I'm going to be plugging in 19 secant of 52. Okay, and we get 30.861. And that's all you have to do. So in this case, that means the hypotenuse is 30.861. I don't know. 3 decimals is just normal. Doesn't really matter to me, to be honest with you.
I was just saying.
Okay. Oh, did it say that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, then you can round to the nearest tenth. That's fine.